What if the smartest legal mind in the city didn't wear a suit, didn't have a degree, and didn't even have a home? She walked into a $45 million deal by accident and rewrote everything. But when the truth came out, they tried to erase her. What she did next changed the game forever. If her story made you feel something, don't scroll past. Hit subscribe for more unbelievable true stories that challenge what we think we know. Leave a comment below. Do you believe talent needs a title? And if you believe brilliance can come from anywhere, share this video. Someone out there needs to hear this. The boardroom smelled like stale coffee and tension. Jackson Reed, CEO of Reed & Walker Law Group, stood at the head of the sleek glass table, fists, clenched eyes, burning into a whiteboard cluttered with legal scribbles. Around him, 8 of the firm's top attorneys, all Ivy League, all expensive, were in the middle of a shouting match. One wrong clause, one misunderstood subparagraph, and the entire $45 million merger with Denham Holdings would crumble. Clause 17D contradicts 6A. There's no workaround, one partner snapped. Then write a new clause, another barked. You can't rewrite a contract that's already signed, a third shouted. Jackson slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Silence fell, just for a second, until the lead counsel Barnes muttered under his breath, "We're losing control." And they were. $45 million on the line. 3 weeks of negotiations. 25 years of reputation. All hanging by a legal thread no one seemed able to untangle. Then it happened. The door burst open. Every head turned. Standing there, soaked from the rain, hair-matted clothes, torn and stained with what looked like paint and ash, was a homeless woman. She clutched a worn-out backpack to her chest. Her cheeks were wind-burnt, and her eyes, though tired, were razor-sharp. Security wasn't even fast enough to react before she took one step forward. "Sorry," she said flatly. "I thought this was a stairwell, just needed a place out of the rain." Barnes was already rising from his chair. "Ma'am, this is a private legal meeting. You need to?" But the woman wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the whiteboard behind Jackson. She squinted, took 2 steps closer. Clause 17D. She asked, her voice calm, almost indifferent. "It's invalid under Title 204B of the Federal Commercial Code. Double indemnity clause violation. You guys wrote it backwards." The room froze. Time stopped. No one moved. No one even blinked. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock behind Jackson's head. "What did you just say?" Jackson asked carefully. She pointed again, tapping a calloused finger in the air toward the scribbles on the board. "That clause," she repeated. "You structured the indemnity in reverse. It violates the double indemnity provisions in federal code. Title 204B subsection 2. You try to shift liability to the buyer. Preemptively. Can't do that anymore. Precedent changed in 2021. You're about to get buried in court." Dead silence. The senior partner, Barnes, narrowed his eyes. "And who the hell are you?" She straightened up, dropped her backpack to the floor with a soft thud. Rain dripped from her sleeves. Nobody. But her eyes stayed locked with Jackson's. The air was electric, charged with disbelief and a strange, reluctant respect. "You a lawyer?" someone scoffed. She tilted her head. "Not anymore." Security finally arrived. "Sir, should we?" "No," Jackson said quickly, raising a hand. He couldn't take his eyes off her. "What's your name?" The woman hesitated. "Emily," she said. "Emily Carter." "Emily Carter," Jackson repeated, slowly, deliberately. He turned toward the whiteboard, looked at the clause, read it again, for the 10th time. Then, for the first time, really saw it. She was right. Not just technically right. Completely, legally, indisputably right. He turned to the room. "Did any of you catch that?" Barnes frowned, flipping frantically through a stack of papers. "That code's buried. It was updated last year. No one's cited it since." "Since the Fulton case," Emily cut in. "Third Circuit, May 2023. Plaintiff won on indemnity grounds." Barnes went pale. Jackson stepped toward her cautiously. "You knew that off the top of your head. I study," she shrugged. Wherever I can sit and not get kicked out." The room felt like it had tilted on its axis. A multi-million-dollar crisis just got solved. By a woman in wet sneakers. You came in here because of the rain, Jackson said, and you solved a problem that 8 lawyers couldn't. Emily didn't flinch. I didn't mean to interrupt, but bad law hurts people, even rich ones. There was no sarcasm in her tone, no arrogance, just quiet clarity. Jackson stared at her for a beat longer, then turned to his team. Meeting adjourned, everyone out. Now. Barnes opened his mouth to object. Jackson cut him off with a glare. You heard me. One by one, the lawyers filed out, confused, humiliated, curious. Only Jackson and Emily remained. He walked to the door, closed it, locked it. Then he turned back, crossed his arms, and said, "Let's talk." Jackson shut the door behind them, locking out the stunned murmurs of his top legal team. The air inside the small executive office felt tighter, heavier, not from tension, but from something else entirely. Reckoning. Across from him stood a woman who minutes ago was just another face in the city, soaked, ignored, and invisible. Now she was Emily Carter, the woman who just saved his $45 million deal with a single sentence. He gestured toward the leather chair across from his desk. She hesitated, then sat, her damp jeans leaving faint marks on the cushion. He sat down too, eyes sharp. "Tell me the truth. Who are you?" She met his gaze. No apology, no embarrassment, just exhaustion and pride. "I was a law student," she said. "Yale, class of 2019. He blinked. "Yale. I was top of my class. Dean's List. Moot court winner twice. What happened?" That question lingered like fog. Emily leaned back, her voice steady. "My father died. Cancer. Medical bills drained everything. Then, my boyfriend emptied our joint account and vanished. Left me with no tuition, no housing, 1 semester short of graduating, and nowhere to go." Silence. "I lived in my car for a while," she continued. "Then I lost that too. Now I move around. Churches, buses, public libraries. Whatever has heat and an outlet." Jackson leaned forward. "But you still study?" She nodded slowly, pulling her worn backpack onto her lap. Unzipped it. Inside, a few crumpled protein bars, a legal pad filled with tiny, perfect handwriting, and 2 thick law books. One of them held together with duct tape. "I read every night. I borrow law journals, print cases at the library, take notes. Just because I'm not in school doesn't mean I stopped being a student." Jackson couldn't take his eyes off her. It wasn't just the knowledge. It was the hunger, the fire. "You remembered a precedent from 2023, off the top of your head." "I remember what matters," she said simply. He rubbed his temple. This couldn't be real, but it was. In a city where people paid thousands for legal advice, a woman sleeping under bridges had just saved his firm from disaster. "You know I can't put you on payroll," he said carefully. "You don't have a law degree. It's illegal." Emily nodded. "I'm not asking for a job. Then what do you want?" She hesitated. Her fingers tightened around her backpack straps. Then quietly, "A chair, a corner, a place where I can read without getting kicked out, and maybe use your printer once in a while." Jackson stared at her. Of all the things she could have asked for money, food recognition, she asked for space. His phone buzzed on the desk. A message from Barnes Media's asking questions. "What do we tell them?" He silenced it. "You can stay," he said finally. "For a few days. We're on lockdown for this deal anyway. I'll say you're a legal researcher off books." Emily exhaled barely a smile, but enough. "You'll be quiet," he added. "I've been invisible for years," she said. The next day, Emily came back early. She had showered probably at a shelter, tied her hair into a bun, and wore the same hoodie, now turned inside out. She carried her books and notebooks, took a seat at an empty cubicle in the admin wing, and opened her notes. Jackson watched from his office window. She blended in silent, focused writing furiously, while the firm buzzed around her clueless. By noon, he dropped a contract draft on her desk. "This clause bothers me." "What do you see?" Emily flipped the page, skimmed. "Ambiguous liability. If Denham defaults, the clause shifts burden without naming a receiver. You'll lose leverage in arbitration." She handed it back without looking up. He walked away with a stunned nod. That afternoon, she found a stack of documents by the printer labeled "Review, if you have time." No name attached, just post-its. One lawyer, then another. then a third. Word was spreading. No one knew who she was, only that the mysterious woman near the admin files knew things. And every time someone left her a question, the reply came back with razor-sharp insight and case references they'd forgotten even existed. By the third day, Jackson called her into his office again. He looked different now, less guarded, more curious. "You ever miss it?" he asked. She looked up. "Miss what?" "The classroom. The structure. A nameplate on a door." Emily thought for a second, then said something that landed hard. "I don't miss the building. I miss the feeling of being seen for what I know, not where I sleep." Jackson didn't respond right away. Then he handed her a keycard. "This gives you access to the staff kitchen. No questions asked." She took it gently. A small thing, but it meant safety, warmth, a chair. That evening, long after the offices emptied, Jackson returned to the admin wing. He found her asleep at her desk, head resting on an open law book. Notes beside her in perfect order. He didn't wake her, just stood there watching the smartest legal mind in the building sleep beside a book older than his last merger. And in that moment, he realized something terrifyingly beautiful. She didn't need the firm needed her. Jackson shut the door behind her for the second time in 3 days. This time, no lawyers, no interruptions, just him and Emily, the mystery woman in sneakers and secondhand books who'd somehow unraveled more legal knots in 48 hours than his entire team had in 2 months. He slid a fresh contract across the desk. It was thicker, denser, the kind of legal mess designed to confuse even experienced partners. No warning, no introduction. Emily didn't hesitate. She opened the folder, scanned silently. Her eyes moved with speed, but nothing about her felt rushed. When she finished, she leaned back in the chair and pointed to the second page. "This clause here," she said. "You copied it from the McAllister deal." Jackson blinked. "How would you even—" "It's got the same error." The indemnity line references a conditional liability from an old federal guideline that was repealed in 2021. If this goes to court, Denham's legal team will jump on it and claim bad faith replication. That voids the entire liability structure. Jackson's jaw tensed. "How do you know that Emily didn't flinch? I read that clause 4 months ago. At the downtown public library. Someone left a printed draft in the recycling bin. I studied it because it confused me. Now it doesn't." He stared at her, silent, processing. Then he asked the question that had been burning in the back of his mind since day one. "What gives you the right to say this stuff?" Emily's response was instant, sharp, honest. "I don't have the right," she said. "I have the knowledge." That hit hard. Jackson leaned back, exhaling slowly. She wasn't posturing. She wasn't bluffing. She wasn't even trying to prove anything. She just knew. He grabbed another folder, thicker, more complex. One more. Emily flipped it open. Her fingers moved fast, stopping on paragraph 6. "This phrasing looks intentional," she said, "but it contradicts Article 93C of the Fair Corporate Practices Act. The wording implies prior knowledge of vendor fraud, which exposes you to joint liability if it ever comes out. Even if you didn't know." Jackson sat up. "We drafted that clause to protect ourselves." "You did the opposite," she replied. "You just handed opposing counsel the knife and leaned in." That one line made the air shift. Jackson rubbed his face with both hands. "You realize you're doing work that people with $300K in student debt still can't manage?" "I'm not trying to do their job," she said quietly. "I'm just trying not to forget who I am." He looked at her, really looked, at the woman across from him who wore no watch, no jewelry, no designer, anything. Just conviction and clarity. "What keeps you going?" he asked softer this time. Emily reached into her backpack and pulled out a notebook. Its cover was torn, pages bent, but inside each line was neatly written, annotated, case law, citations, questions, ideas. "This," she said. "Every time someone threw me out of a building, every time I had to sleep outside, every time someone looked at me like I was nothing, I opened this, because knowledge is the one thing they can't take from me." Jackson felt that in his bones. "I'm not licensed. I'm not a partner. I'm not even employed," Emily continued. "But I'm not broken. And I'm not ignorant. I read every night. I take notes when my hands aren't too cold. I memorize rulings by street lamp light. And I do it because one day I'll be back. For real. She stood up, clutching her notebook to her chest. But until then, this is all I have. For a long moment, Jackson didn't say a word. Then he reached for the folder on his desk, the one with the merger's final draft, and slid it toward her. I want your eyes on this before it goes to legal review. Emily froze. I can't. You already did, he interrupted. Twice. Better than anyone in this office. She shook her head, almost afraid to believe it. Why are you doing this? Jackson gave a half smile. Because I've got a $45 million deal riding on your brain. And because I'm starting to think the smartest person in this building doesn't have a corner office. That night, Emily didn't sleep in a shelter. She slept in the firm's small research lounge, curled up next to a stack of legal handbooks, her notebook under her arm, and a fresh printed copy of the contract she'd just reviewed. Outside, the city kept rushing. But inside, for the first time in years, Emily had a desk of purpose, and someone who saw her not as homeless, not as a charity case, but as exactly who she was meant to be. It started with an unspoken agreement. No titles, no press, no attention. Just two people, a CEO with too much to lose and a woman with nothing left to hide, working behind closed doors to keep a $45 million merger from collapsing. Jackson offered Emily 3 nights in the firm's rarely used intern suite. A small room, barely bigger than a walk-in closet, but for someone who'd been sleeping on buses and in church basements, it felt like a 5-star hotel. In return, Emily would stay off the radar and act as a ghost reviewer. Her job was simple. Keep reading, keep spotting holes, and keep saving Jackson's firm from falling apart. By day, she worked in silence at a tucked-away desk in the archives room, buried between case files and printer paper. By night, she devoured contracts, highlighted contradictions, scribbled notes in pencil, and returned them to Jackson before sunrise. Her precision was terrifying. She didn't just catch typos. She spotted liability traps, buried 14 pages deep. She flagged legal phrasing that, while technically correct, could be twisted by aggressive opposing counsel. She even reworded entire clauses in plain English, making complex arguments suddenly airtight. Jackson began relying on her input more than his partners, and that didn't go unnoticed, especially by Mason Hale, a junior associate with a 6-figure ego and a chip on his shoulder. Mason had clawed his way into Reed & Walker, straight from Stanford, and he'd made it clear to everyone he wasn't here to fetch coffee or be second-guessed. So when he started noticing his contract revisions were being revised again quietly overnight, he got curious. One morning, he opened a draft and saw notes in unfamiliar handwriting, ambiguity in subsection 4A, cross-check with consumer rights litigation post-2020. He frowned. That wasn't Jackson's hand, and it definitely wasn't any of the senior partners. He checked the printer log, then the access records for the admin lounge. That's when he saw her name. Emily Carter. Who the hell is Emily Carter? He muttered, and that's when the unraveling began. The next afternoon, Jackson returned from a client meeting to find Mason in his office, uninvited, arms crossed. We need to talk, Mason said, tossing a printout on Jackson's desk. About her. Jackson didn't pick up the paper. Be specific. I did some digging. She's not on payroll. Not in the bar. Not even listed as a legal assistant. Mason stepped closer. You've got a homeless woman living in our building, rewriting high-stakes contracts off the books. Do you have any idea how many ethical codes that violates? Jackson stayed calm. She's not practicing law. She's reviewing drafts. That's a technicality, Mason snapped. And if the board finds out, or worse, the press. Jackson finally looked down at the paper. It was Emily's notebook. 1 page photocopied, her handwriting, her annotations, her mind on full display. She's a liability, Mason said. Jackson looked up, voice ice cold. She's the reason this deal hasn't exploded. Mason scoffed. She's not a lawyer. She's a squatter. And that was the moment something in Jackson snapped. He stood, slowly, towering over Mason now. Get out, he said. Now. You're protecting her, Mason barked. Over your own team, Jackson didn't flinch. You're not my team if you think like that. Mason stormed out, slamming the door. That night, Jackson found Emily in the archives room, headphones on, scribbling furiously into a stack of papers. She didn't look up until he gently knocked on the doorframe. "You okay?" she asked, instantly, reading his face. He handed her the photocopy Mason had left. Her body stiffened. "Someone knows." Jackson nodded. "One of the juniors. Mason Hale." "I'll leave," Emily said quickly. "First thing in the morning." But Jackson shook his head. "No," she blinked. "But you could get disbarred." "This firm, I don't care about optics," he said. "I care about results. And no one delivers like you." Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from something else. Recognition, trust, a kind of respect she hadn't felt in years. Then, "What do we do?" she asked. Jackson exhaled. "We keep going, quietly, carefully. You stay in the shadows, but your mind stays in the spotlight." Emily nodded, but deep down, a new feeling stirred in her chest. Not just gratitude, loyalty. In the days that followed, they developed a rhythm, a partnership that wasn't built on titles or hierarchy, but on trust and results. Jackson began slipping her cases outside the merger, arbitration settlements, risk audits, even mock trial scenarios. Emily shredded through them all with the same relentless clarity. She was invisible to the firm, but essential to its survival. And though they barely shared more than a few sentences at a time, something real was building. In the pauses between red lines and legal jargon, connection grew. He once asked her, "What would you do if none of this had happened?" She didn't hesitate. "I'd argue constitutional law before the Supreme Court." He smiled. "You still could." She didn't answer, but in that silence he heard it hope. And that terrified him more than anything, because the more he relied on her, the more he realized she wasn't the one who needed saving. He was. It all unraveled with one video. Grainy footage, zoomed in, poorly lit. But the moment was unmistakable. Emily Carter, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, holding a pen, was standing in front of 3 junior lawyers, pointing at a document. She wasn't asking questions. She was directing, rewriting, leading. The clip was less than 20 seconds. But by the time it hit social media, the damage was done. Exclusive CEO of Reed & Walker secretly uses homeless woman as legal advisor. Unauthorized practice of law whistleblower footage raises red flags. From the streets to the boardroom or straight to court. The headlines exploded within hours. Screenshots, think pieces, anonymous sources. Mason's fingerprints were all over it. By noon, a Wall Street legal weekly journalist was waiting outside the firm's front doors. By 1:00 p.m., the boardroom was full, and by 1:07, Emily Carter was summoned. She walked in quietly, no hoodie today, just a borrowed blazer that didn't quite fit, and shoes that still squeaked. Her hair was neat, her face calm, but her eyes carried storms. Jackson sat at the head of the table, jaw clenched. Around him, the board's senior members looked less like partners and more like prosecutors. "Ms. Carter," one of them said, "you are not licensed to practice law. Yet here we have evidence of you advising staff on confidential contracts. Would you like to explain?" Emily glanced at Jackson, who gave her a subtle nod. But she didn't defend herself. She didn't beg. She stood taller. "I never claimed to be a lawyer," she said clearly. "I read, I think, I help where I can. And yes, I told your people when something looked wrong. Because silence has a cost. I've lived it." One board member raised a brow. "And you think that justifies practicing law without a license?" Emily paused, then spoke slowly. "No, but I wasn't practicing law. I was practicing logic and survival." That silence again, thick, unforgiving. Jackson opened his mouth to speak but was cut off. "With all due respect," another member said coldly, "your presence here is now a liability. We can't afford headlines like this in the middle of a $45 million merger." Jackson slammed his hand on the table. "You wouldn't have a merger without her." "She's not part of this firm," the board chair snapped. "She never was. And if you can't control your attachments, Jackson, maybe you're the one who needs to step back." Emily didn't wait to hear the rest. She turned, walked out of the room, past the open-mouthed interns and whispering staff out through the glass doors of a building she'd helped hold together, and stepped into the rain. No umbrella, no goodbye, just one final thing. At the security desk, she dropped a folded note with her name on it. When Jackson found it 20 minutes later, the ink was smudged from the rain, but still legible. I didn't ask to be trusted. I just wanted to contribute. If knowledge isn't welcome here, I'll take it somewhere that needs it more. Emily. The following hours were brutal. Jackson tried to reach her. Her number burner, disconnected, her room empty, her books gone. All she left behind was the notebook, the one she always carried. It was sitting on his desk, open to a half-filled page, and written at the top, "Things they can't take from me." Underneath, federal code titles, court rulings, a quote, "Courage is knowing the math and still taking the risk." He didn't sleep that night. By morning, the press storm had intensified, and the board was panicking. But something was different. The merger wasn't failing. It was flourishing. Emily's contract revisions, the logic she'd tightened, the loopholes she'd closed, were now the reason Denham Holdings' legal team backed off their threats. They didn't want arbitration anymore. They were ready to sign. It was undeniable. The woman they pushed out had made the deal possible. Silently, invisibly, brilliantly. Jackson walked into the boardroom at 8:00 a.m. with a single page in hand. Emily's revisions. He dropped it on the table. "You wanted a clean deal," he said. "You got it, because of her." One partner mumbled, "Still doesn't change what Jackson cut in. That she didn't come from Harvard, that she didn't wear a suit, or that she made every one of us look blind in our own field." Silence. "She didn't ask for a title," he continued. "She didn't take a dime. She just wanted to prove she was still worth something. And we threw her out because we were scared of how right she was." He looked each board member in the eye. "I'm not letting that stand." And with that, he turned and walked out, leaving them to choke on their own hypocrisy. Meanwhile, Emily sat 2 blocks away under the awning of a 24-hour diner, sipping coffee she paid for, with her last crumpled $5 bill. She had no idea the deal had closed. No idea her work had saved everything. She just knew one thing. She wouldn't disappear again. Not this time. 2 weeks had passed. The dust from the media frenzy had barely settled, but the real war was just beginning. The $45 million merger between Reed and Walker and Denham Holdings, now finalized in writing, was under legal fire. Denham's previous partner, a tech investment group called Caldera Equity, filed an emergency injunction claiming that a clause in the contract was misleading and violated antitrust protocols. Their entire argument hinged on one obscure paragraph, the exact clause Emily Carter had warned about. Inside the courthouse, the tension was unbearable. Jackson Reed sat beside his legal team at the defense table, staring straight ahead. The opposing side's lead counsel was a veteran litigator known for tearing holes in airtight deals. And now, with media back in the spotlight and the board breathing down his neck, Jackson had to defend not only his contract, but his decision to trust a woman the world still didn't know existed. Caldera's lawyer stood pacing confidently. This contract's indemnity structure favors Reed and Walker so heavily it raises suspicion of coercion. Your Honor, this clause alone shows reckless manipulation. And we have reason to believe this section wasn't even written by a licensed attorney. Gasps fluttered across the room. Jackson shifted in his chair. His team whispered strategy, but it all sounded like noise. Because deep down, he knew they were right about one thing. Emily wrote that clause. But they were dead wrong about the rest. The judge turned to the defense. "Mr. Reed, do you have a response?" Jackson froze. His voice caught in his throat. This was the moment where his career could shatter, all because he listened to a woman with no credentials, no degree, and no business rewriting contracts. But also a woman who had never once been wrong. He opened his mouth, then stopped. And that's when it happened. The back door of the courtroom creaked open. Jackson turned instinctively. Emily Carter had walked in, hair still damp from the rain, hoodie under a borrowed blazer. Eyes locked on the front like she belonged there, because she did. She didn't say a word, just made her way to the last row and sat down. Then she leaned forward and whispered something to the firm's paralegal, who was seated closest to her. The paralegal froze, then nodded, then stood and whispered it to Jackson. Jackson's eyes widened. He stood. "Your Honor," he said, suddenly calm, "we would like to redirect attention to Title 204B subsection 3 of the Federal Commercial Code, and more specifically to the precedent set in Drake v. Fulton, 2018. The room fell still. The judge leaned forward. "Go on." Jackson picked up the contract. According to Drake v. Fulton, when liability clauses mirror language from pre-repealed federal language but serve to limit harm rather than conceal it, they are considered protective, not manipulative. The clause in question, though seemingly aggressive, aligns perfectly with the court's ruling in that case. He paused. Let the silence grow. Caldera's argument relies on outdated readings of Title 204B. But we're not violating precedent. We're following it. The opposing counsel flipped through his files, his eyes darting. He didn't have the case, didn't see it coming, because no one had, except Emily. The judge nodded slowly. Motion to dismiss this challenge is granted. Boom. Just like that. The courtroom erupted in stunned silence. Jackson turned around. Emily was already standing, already walking toward the door. No fanfare, no recognition. Until the judge cleared her throat and said, "Excuse me, miss, are you legal counsel for the defense?" Emily paused just slightly, then shook her head. "No, ma'am, just someone who reads a lot." She turned again, but this time the entire courtroom stood up. Applause, not from her team, from everyone, even the opposing bench, because in one moment, one line, she had dismantled an entire argument with nothing but memory law and heart. Outside the courthouse, the sky had finally cleared. Jackson caught up to her on the steps. "I told you I didn't want you to leave," he said. She smirked. "You didn't exactly stop me either. I didn't know how." They stood in silence, sunlight breaking through behind them. "I'm sorry," he said. Emily looked away, her voice quieter now. "You don't owe me that." "I do," he said, "because I let them question you. I let them scare me into forgetting what I already knew." "And what's that?" "That you're the best legal mind I've ever worked with." Emily turned back, her expression unreadable. "Then why don't I have a desk?" Jackson reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a plastic card. Her name was printed on it in bold: Emily Carter, legal strategist, access level full. She blinked. "This isn't a temporary ID." "No," he said. "This is your office key, and a contract too. You'll be paid. You'll be listed. You'll be seen." She stared at it for a moment. Then slowly she took it. Later that week, inside Reed & Walker, Jackson stood before the board contract in one hand, Emily's notebook in the other. "She saved this company," he said. "She doesn't wear the suit. She didn't take the test. But she proved that law isn't about paper. It's about truth. And when we punish brilliance for not coming in the right package, we lose more than lawsuits." The board didn't clap, but no one objected either, because sometimes the loudest statement is the one no one dares argue with. And from that day forward, Emily Carter had a desk, a title, and a place where her knowledge wasn't just tolerated, it was finally respected. A week after the courtroom victory, the city had returned to its usual rhythm, fast, indifferent buzzing with noise. But inside Central Park, early on a crisp Sunday morning, it was quiet enough to hear the wind moving through the leaves. Emily sat on a worn bench under a maple tree, sipping black coffee from a paper cup. She wore the same navy hoodie, the same threadbare jeans. The only thing new was the calm on her face. She didn't know he was coming, but Jackson Reed had never been the kind of man who let stories end at the climax. He believed in closure. He believed in starting again, especially with people who'd been written off. So when he appeared beside her, holding a small envelope and a look of peace, she wasn't surprised, just quietly ready. He sat down without a word, handed her the envelope. Inside was a sleek black card. Employee badge, Reed & Walker, LLP. Name, Emily Carter. Title, Legal Strategist Access. All departments. She stared at it. For a moment, she didn't speak. "Then why'd you come here?" Jackson leaned back on the bench, watching the sun peek through the branches. Because this is where I imagine you go when the world gets loud. Emily gave a half smile. You're not wrong. You earned this? He said, nodding toward the badge. I didn't do it for that. I know, he said softly. She closed the envelope, set it beside her coffee. You still refusing the bonus? He asked. She nodded. Jackson shook his head, smiling. Most people would have taken the money and run. Emily looked at him, honest and unflinching. I didn't need money. I needed to know I still mattered. That my brain wasn't garbage just because I didn't have a title. That I could walk into a room and not be erased. Her voice cracked slightly, but she didn't apologize. I just wanted a place to prove that knowledge doesn't need a home to exist. Jackson didn't respond right away. He let her words hang in the air, then slowly turned toward her. Well, he said, how about this? He reached into his coat pocket again and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Her eyes narrowed. What's that? He handed it to her. She unfolded it and froze. It was a lease, a studio apartment, downtown. Not fancy, not large, but hers. Paid in full for a year, no strings. And at the bottom, scribbled in pen, were the words, "Let me be that home if you'll let me." Emily stared at it stunned, then looked at him, blinking through tears that had no place in her usual armor. Why, she whispered, because somewhere along the way, he said, I realized you weren't just fixing my contracts. You were fixing me. Silence. Then she laughed, wiping at her eyes with her sleeve. That's cheesy, Jackson. Yeah, he grinned, but it's true. That Monday morning, the lobby of Reed & Walker was busier than ever. Associates in tailored suits flew between meetings, phones ringing, elevators chiming. Then the room shifted, because walking through the revolving doors was Emily Carter. She wore the same hoodie, the same old backpack, but clipped to her chest was something new. Her name badge, legal strategist, access full. She walked straight through the main corridor, and people noticed, not in judgment, in recognition. She passed the admin desks, the break room, the junior associate offices, and finally stopped at the corner space where a gold plaque had just been installed. She stepped closer, running her fingers along the engraving. It read, "It doesn't matter where you've been. What matters is what you choose to learn and how you choose to live." Emily didn't cry. She just smiled, set her bag down, opened her notebook, flipped to a fresh page, and began writing again. Because her journey wasn't about one big win, one dramatic courtroom moment, or one person finally giving her a shot. It was about something bigger, that intelligence doesn't wear labels, that dignity survives on park benches, and that when someone finally believes in you, truly sees you, you rise. Even if you started with nothing, even if you had no roof, no desk, no title. Now she had them all. But more importantly, she had herself. Sometimes, the most brilliant minds don't sit in corner offices. They sleep under bridges, read by streetlight, and carry their dreams in a worn-out backpack. Emily's story reminds us of a powerful truth. Your worth is not defined by your zip code, your title, or your past. It's defined by your courage to keep learning, to keep showing up, even when no one sees you. In a world obsessed with credentials, she proved that knowledge, resilience, and heart are sometimes more valuable than any degree on a wall. She didn't need saving. She needed someone to believe. So if you're out there doubting your path, your timing, or your value, remember this. You don't have to be in the right place to become the right person. Keep growing, keep pushing. And when the door doesn't open, build your own.